Yes, hello and welcome to this EUA webinar on artificial intelligence and institutional strategies. And the purpose of this webinar is to see where we are with respect to particularly generative AI. It's about 1.5 years since we saw ChatGPT and all the disruption it brought. And we know that a lot of you have been experimenting with how to deal with this in the classroom, in your research, in assessment. And maybe it is time to look at where we are with the experimentation and where we are in terms of making this into institutional strategies and have a little bit more a handle on that as institutional leaders. And we have two excellent speakers to get us into this. But before we do that, I will just make a short presentation of EUA, what we have done, and a little bit more what we're going to do today. So I assume most of you will know EUA, but those of you that don't, we are the Association of European Universities, almost 900 in 52 countries, as you can see on the map, not only EU, but much further afield, the whole continent, from the ocean to Central Asia. Just to show a little bit what we have been doing on AI. Shortly after the, let's say, the beginning of the larger political discussion about particularly machine learning, we came out with a position, what was sort of our basic thoughts on that. And what we came out with was that, of course, we needed open data for this to function. We needed interdisciplinarity. This was not a single discipline issue. And we wanted AI to be built within the local innovation ecosystems. We did not want a big, lonely research institute that does this in an excellent way, but away from the students and away from the innovators. So that was back in 2018. You can either download it. It's also in the room before you went into the webinar. You can download that position. It's funny to read. I think it still holds. It holds surprisingly well 6 years after. But of course, after that we had the, let's say, more internally disruptive issue of generative AI, and particularly generative AI for text. And we found that we at least very quickly should say something generally about this. What we looked at was to say, and this is also in the title of this webinar, let's explore how this works. Let's adapt to it. We cannot ban it. It will not disappear. We need to explore and adapt. And we need to see this, and that was important, in the continuous reform of learning and teaching. We, of course, had a lot of best practice sharing. We had I think, very interesting webinar we did on generative AI about a year ago with the arts schools, which have been working on this actually much longer than universities more concentrated on the written word has. We had a webinar on AI in science. You can also find that in the attendees hub. This was for members only, so it will only be there for a short while. That was interesting as well, much more political. But we don't stop here. We don't stop with this webinar. We think that it's very important that we share good practice and that we have a continuous dialogue between universities on this issue. So very happy to see so many people today. I think we have about 1,000 people that signed up for this webinar. We will follow up in about a month on the 18th of June with a webinar on ethics. It's a topic that has been there for the start and will continue to be there. We have what we call expert voices. several blog posts. One was, I think, published yesterday, a very thoughtful piece, also in the attendee hub, or you can see it directly on the EUA.eu website. We intend to move forward with this in the autumn, have some more interactive workshops, and we plan for a online conference in next spring. We have some very, very talented experts to put us forward on this, and Pedro Ruiz, which you'll hear later, is leading that group, which we're very happy about. For today, as I said, we have excellent speakers. We will start with a more, let's say, abstract and general view on it. We'll have Michael Webb, who is Director of Technology and Analytics at Jisc. We have Michael Webb from Jisc, which he will introduce. It's a, let's say, complex organization that deals with digital transformation in the UK. And as I said, we have then Pedro Ruiz, who is Vice Rector for Digitalization and Strategy at the University of Murcia in Spain, giving the more institutional issue. When people are talking, please don't hesitate to have questions in the Q&A tab, which you will see to your right. It's not the same as the general chat. If you ask questions in the chat, we will move them into the Q&A. And if you see questions you like in the Q&A, please vote for them. That will make it easier also from here to see which one you're more interested in for the speakers. And that much said, we'll dive into the practices in a moment. But before that, we'll have a small poll just to see where are people in this spectrum from experimentation to strategies. And you can see that on your screen now. Let's see how that develops. Yeah, that begins to give a little bit of a picture. Where we were lucky, I think. We were lucky. It's what is in, I would say, is the sweet spot for best practice sharing. People are experimenting. They're experimenting and developing a strategy. Some people have no policies in place, clearly. Few people, very few people, but nevertheless almost 30, have a strategy in place. So we are really on that tipping point where we are moving from the let's say, experimentation in the classroom and to something that's much more institutional. So that is in itself very, very interesting. Yeah, almost now the no policies are up with we are experimenting. But of course, you can be in both places. Good. So let's go to the more exciting part and listen to Michael Webb from Jisc about their maturity model and how they see the development of institutions in the field of artificial intelligence. So please, Michael.
Hi, good to speak to you all. So I'm going to start by just telling you a little bit about Jisc and who I am. So I head up Jisc's artificial intelligence team, a team that we formed about 3 years ago. Sorry, just get my slides working. Let's start with Jisc. So we're a national organisation. We are a not-for-profit organisation, and we provide a wide range of digital services. Just to give you an idea of our size, we are a complex organisation. There are about 1,250 staff now. We've got 164 universities as our members, about 360 colleges, and a number of research institutions as well. And we provide a wide range of services to those institutions. So we're perhaps best known for providing the network infrastructure but we've provided services around cybersecurity, cloud, AI, obviously, licensing, digital transformation, and all sorts of other services. We formed our AI team, as I said, about 3 years ago with the aim of helping our members accelerate the adoption of AI in a responsible and effective way. And we decided to take a very hands-on approach by that. So we run pilots, we provide a lot of information and guidance, events, and we sustain a community. So we've got about 1,500 people who join in our overall AI community, and we break down into smaller working groups. And the maturity model that I'm going to describe is very much as part of the information, advice and guidance work that we do. And it was actually the very first thing, or one of the very first things that we did when we formed the team. And the model I'm going to show you today is actually our second version. We did it right at the start, though, partly because we wanted to map out and understand people's journey with AI. We wanted it to be a practical tool to help people plan activities. We also wanted a shared language and discussion. So it's been really helpful to talk to people to say, hey, we're at the experimenting, exploring stage, and we want to move to embedded and things like that. So it's been useful just to have shared discussion. It's a very straightforward model. Don't worry about reading the detail of the individual words at the moment if they're quite small, because I'm going to talk through those. But we just move through a number of stages. When we started 3 years ago, most people were at the approaching and understanding stage, just potentially getting interested in AI. OpenAI did a huge amount of work by launching ChatGPT to move everyone quickly to experimenting, exploring. And then we move people through operational, embedded, where it's very much business as usual, to the destination, which is either in our model optimized or transformed. And I'll talk a little bit about why we framed it like that. And in the UK, most institutions, very much as described on this call, are at the state of moving from experimenting and exploring to operational and embedded and actively engaged in that. And I'll show you some numbers around this later on. I'll just walk through the main stages of our model. I won't dwell too long on approaching and understanding, but I will say that things have changed quite dramatically over the last 3 years. So 3 years ago, our work was very much focused on getting institutions to an approaching and understanding position, getting them interested in AI. And as we all know, things have flipped dramatically since OpenAI released ChatGPT. So in some ways, it's made our work a lot easier. One of the things that I wanted to pull out there, though, is at the early stage, we were very keen when people looked at AI. They didn't just look at how it was impacting education, but broadly about how it was transforming other sectors as well. And there were 2 reasons for this. First is that other sectors were and still are ahead, so it could provide lots of inspiration to education. But the other is obviously that our students end up in the other sectors. So this gives an indication of the kind of tools that they, the kind of skills that they need to get for the future workplace. And our next stage is experimenting, exploring. And on all of these, we guide a number of key activities. So this has got very straightforward. One of the reasons that we did pilots is that when we started, to get people to experiment with AI, we had to give them an AI tool. Now it's everywhere. It's in our everyday tools. Anyone can use ChatGPT and so on. So it's become much easier to experiment and pilot with AI. There are a couple of other things that we wanted right at the beginning. The first is that the beginnings of a discussion about the right data culture and data maturity to support AI, and Jisc has a separate stream of work about data maturity. And also that right at the start, institutions establish beginnings of processes around responsible AI. So to ensure that their use is ethical, safe with their data and so on. The next stage, and the one that has been the focus of our work over the last year, is moving people to a more operational mode. There are a few things that we have picked out as core activities that are really important now. The first is that institutions establish AI principles. So these are top level guiding statements about how they view AI. In the university sector, the Russell Group grouped together to produce a set of principles which other institutions have largely followed. The next is that we think that upskilling staff is super important. So a systematic approach to AI skills and literacy. We think that at this stage, there'll be two quite different uses of AI becoming standard. The first is our everyday AI tools, the things that are getting built into Microsoft Office, into the browser, Copilot, all of those sort of things should be institution-wide, and we should start seeing personal productivity gains. The other is not forgetting more traditional AI. Still huge amounts of things to be gained by more traditional AI, and we see that those at this mode should be deployed for specific tasks across the institution in an operational mode. This might be a chatbot supporting student enrollment. It might be a tool to automate the processing of student feedback data, any of those kind of things. But there should be something that's operational at this point rather than an experiment. Moving to embedded, and I think this is an interesting discussion based on the opening questions. We framed it that AI should be embedded in strategy rather than you should have a separate AI strategy. We did some work to have a look at how education was comparing with other sectors, and we noticed, for example, in the healthcare sector, we were seeing a lot more, even 2 years ago, statements embedding AI in the strategy than we were in education. We think at this point, data maturity will stop being a blocker for AI being implemented in systems as it is at the moment. And also, we'll have established processes to deal with things that are different about AI. So fundamentally, we see the difference being that traditional deterministic systems, once you deploy them, carry on behaving the same way they always have. AI products don't. The models learn, the data changes, and we really must make sure at this stage we have robust and standard processes to ensure that we continually monitor the effectiveness of our AI systems. And our final stage, and this is one that changed from the first version of our model to our most recent one, was the end goal of transformed or optimized. To start with, we had this as transformed, and we reflected and discussed this a lot. And actually, we realized that the goal for many organizations was actually optimization. So by this, we mean that the institutions will broadly deliver similar qualifications to they always have to broadly similar groups of students, but we want to do it better, more efficiently, better outcomes, that kind of thing, which is really optimization. True transformation is much rarer. And yes, we think that there will be some players in the education space that go down this route, radically different delivery models, different qualifications. AI enables all of this. But at least in the short term, we don't see where that's where people are targeting. So we frame this as supporting the delivery of learning that optimizes opportunities and outcomes for all. So very much about equality. And we're very much focusing on saying it's the right tasks are automated to free up staff time and creativity. And when we talk about this more, we're very wary saying, don't just automate the tasks that you've got at the moment. That may well actually just generate more work. Generative AI by definition can create content. So think about actually what you want to do at this stage and make sure you're really optimizing processes. To support this, we've created a checklist for the institutions with a whole bunch of things to move through from experimenting to operational, the operational stage. And I just wanted to end by just sharing some of the things we're seeing in terms of where institutions are. So these kind of things say, have you got established principles? Have you got a working group? Have you reviewed your policies, etc., etc.? So we've just completed a survey of the Jisc members, and we got responses from, I think it was about 130 universities and more colleges. I'm just going to show you the university results now, just to give you a feel for where we are in the UK. And I think it very much reflects what we saw in the poll to start with. So these are the results for have you got a working group? Have you reviewed policies? Have you got student guidance in place? Have you got staff guidance in place? And have you got a staff development program in place? As you can see, the bulk of our members have either got a working group and reviewed their policies or are planning to. And it tails off a little bit when we get to staff guidance, and as you can see, structured staff development programs much more at the planning stage than at the already happening stage. We asked people how prepared they felt. It won't surprise you, given that that most of the numbers are under 50% or nearly. Given all the focus on academic integrity, that comes up as highest and prepared. But people are feeling very unprepared still around things like data protection, intellectual property, AI safety, and equality. And I'll just end by showing you the kind of things that they are doing as they move towards the operational stage. And again, it's no surprise that the highest responses are around T&L, teaching and learning preparation and delivery. And certainly from our respondents, then as we got more into back office functions, less use, but a lot of interest, and that's where people are wanting to focus at the moment. So that's what I wanted to share with you to start with. I hope that was useful. I think we've got plenty of time for questions and answers after the next presentation.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, first of all, for fleshing out a little bit more than we're experimenting, but what are we doing? I think that was maybe not overly surprising, but still interesting to see also the weight that learning and teaching has on this. And then the issue of optimization versus transformation. I think this is something that comes up again and again in our discussion, and I mentioned the expert voice we just published, where that is part of the thematics as well. So many thanks. As you say, we will have Q&A afterwards. If you have questions, please don't hesitate when it comes into your mind to go to your right Q&A tab, and we will then approve them, and then you can see what other people ask and maybe also vote for them. But without further ado, let's move to Pedro Ruiz from the University of Murcia, where you have also been thinking about how within the institutional context you can sort of step up from experimentation to something that's more strategic. So please, Pedro.
Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation to be in this webinar. It's for me a pleasure to share some insights on the thing we have been doing and experimenting within the Spanish Conference of Rectors and also in my own university. The title of the presentation probably is a little bit too ambitious, but my idea is thinking about what can we do to move from different pilots that we see most universities are currently doing that in Spain to strategic adoption of AI so that we can actually use it to provide value. So when people ask me on what's my feeling or my perception on what's the current situation regarding the AI adoption in higher education institutions, at least in Spain, which is the area I know more, but I think also in other parts of the world internationally, I have the feeling that probably the sentence that summarizes it better is like madmen have taken the hospital. So while when we were talking about digital transformation, we had the feeling that leadership, it was important, and we had to push people, to adopt the new services, to change the mind and implement the new tools. Now what we see is that basically AI tools are widely accessible to everyone. So we're starting to see that students, faculty, and staff are basically using them for whatever they consider it's fine and based on their own criteria. And in many cases, we also see that there's still some people who are unaware of the risk of the use and using proper use of the tools. And in some of the cases, in my own institution, I saw for some time some of those early adopters, which, those are very valuable people when you talk about digital transformation, because those are the champions that can help you actually change culture. And now you see how they are teaching and skilling some other colleagues on how to use some tools that probably they are not the ones that the university will have chosen, or the university may be worried about not being able to provide enough warranties. So we see that there is a lack of governance in the sense that things are happening probably without a clear directions and controls. And even in those institutions that actually clearly and from the starting claim to be completely supporting AI, what we have seen is that many pilots are happening in different areas, units, and even parts of the institution. And now they're facing big problem because those pilots are based on different tools, and they cannot try to mix together, learn from experience, and scale them up. So what I have a feeling is that the key question now is basically governance. It's important that we take AI as we took IT before, and we establish some basic governance so that everything regarding AI may happen in an organized way within the institution. And one of those tools that I think are probably very important to govern is to have, first of all, a clear strategy. So when we think about institutional strategy, we know that it's very important. We think about how can we provide value, and it's important that we, do not pretend to be the best at anything, and we have to make a clear bet for being or at least having one particular area in which we want to excel. And it could be customer intimacy. We want to be excellent at our student experience, or we want to be excellent at having internal operational excellence, and that means that we want to be sure that our internal processes are very much optimized and we can, save resources. Or we might think we could go like being a product leader, which means that basically that we are the next Apple of the education, and we are creating some educational models that will transform education, and at the end everyone will adopt. But whatever we choose as an institution is our primary excellence area. Of course, it's important that our AI use cases and our AI deployment will follow those. Otherwise, it may happen that we are developing some pilots that may be nice and interesting to the IT guys. It may happen that we're developing some pilots that may be interesting to particular units, but they are not providing institutional value. And that's why I say that even if you have just institutional strategy, that may not be enough. because in some cases it happens that even different units at the same university have different views on what's important value and what provides value for institution. So we don't have just to work on strategy, but we also need to work on building internal capabilities and, of course, change management and changing the internal culture. So even though I usually like to describe this thing like this is when like a table with 3 legs. You might have the perfect strategy, but I mean, and you can also have, you know, your internal capabilities. You might be AI ready, your IT staff may be well prepared, you might have enough resources to handle that. If you are not able to change culture, then you're going to fail. So if any of those legs fails, either the cultural change, even either not having the right strategy or even not being able to build the internal capabilities, then you are going to fail in adopting AI. And this is why, from this perspective, we try to summarize some recommendations, I would say some roadmap and steps on how to try to adopt AI in higher education institutions. And this is something we're trying to establish as a roadmap for Spanish institutions. And I usually like to describe it like in 3 main axes. One is preparing the playfield. The second one is training your team. And the third one is basically scoring your goals. So when I talk about preparing the playfield, I talk about basically being sure that our institution is ready to adopt and work on AI. And one of the things that I see often is that we're still lacking on very important IT departments and important IT areas that are key to further implement and enhance AI. We've been talking for a long time about the importance of being a data-centric institution to be able to take informed decisions. And that was just data analytics, not even AI. And in many institutions, we are still suffering quite a lot on not being able to have a really strong data governance framework, for instance. And this is not only in Spain. I mean, I've been also looking at other reports, and you see, for instance, that it's the same for the US and some of the countries. So in that regard, trying to work on artificial intelligence, which is basically based on data, if you're not able to govern your data, to define which are the key assets, to secure your data, to clean your data, and to know, and most important, what data, not only what is the data that you have, but what is the data that you are missing to develop your strategy, that could be a very big mistake. So it's very important that we work on data governance and also identifying right data sources. And the second step is basically being able to, apply resources for AI. Because what I see in many institutions when we analyze them is that they are already quite overcommitted in terms of the project they are developing, and they don't have probably enough resources to increase the number of new transformative projects they can handle. In particular, this is the case for our university. You can see that currently just maintaining whatever we have is taking out us almost half of the resources that we have. And that's a very good number after 3 or 4 years working on optimizing it. So that means that our capabilities to embrace new AI-related projects, which in particular require a lot of effort, not only in terms of money, but also in terms of people, it's very limited. So we need definitely to work hard in trying to optimize our portfolio, and otherwise we cannot start with that. And then there's the AI strategy. In our case, we see that AI strategy is not embedded, but is aligned to the institutional strategy, although it may also be embedded. Why not? But it's important to differentiate between an AI strategy and recommendations. What we've seen in many institutions is that what they do have is kind of recommendations on how to use AI, make a responsible use, but that's not a strategy. Strategy is basically something more. Strategy is a plan on what exactly what you're going to be doing step by step, and identifying what are key areas. And of course, those have to be related with the overall strategy of the institution. So in some cases, even it's look at other sectors to find samples of good strategies. For instance, the City of New York AA strategy is a good starting point, not because that's the more mature I have seen, but it's very simple. It's a good starting point so that you can build on top of that and do a continuous improvement cycle, right? So this is for me like the preparing the playfield. I mean, without that, you cannot even start the match. And then, of course, you have to have a team. And for me, it's very important that you create a multidisciplinary team. I think that we have failed so many times before when we have tried to lead some initiatives or institutional initiatives from IT, when they are actually more transversal to other units and areas. And for instance, that's happening with data governance. So it's important that with AI, whenever it's possible to include different units and people with a multidisciplinary view, you create a multicultural team. In our case, basically, we've created a team which is basically based on all different kind of staff, like a faculty, we have academic staff, we have also students, and what we're trying to do is create a group of people that really feel that they can define and understand how to adopt it, and that we're able to get into the shoes of the other ones. In particular, it's also very important to develop, and I agree with Michael, he already mentioned that before, it's very important to develop internal AI capabilities in terms of skilling your faculty, staff, students, and more important, IT department. We might think that AI is just basically something related with IT, so my IT department is already prepared, but that's not the case in general. I mean, things have evolved quite a lot, and we just see continuously new tools and new technologies coming up. So it's important that you also skill your IT department. And of course, I agree that it's very important to create a normative framework that guarantees that you use a safe, ethical, and responsible use of AI. So when you have all of that is when I think you should start and can start working on defining specific initiatives and specific AI projects. And from the title of my presentations, it might seem that I was against pilots and thinking that, okay, we need to move from pilots to projects, but that's not the case. I mean, what I think is, of course, we still need to work with pilots because things are changing very much, and we need to take advantage that new technologies allows us to experiment, to be innovative, and to fail fast and learn from the failures. That's definitely something we have to do because everything is still very immature in AI in general. So in particular, when I'm thinking about getting the fruits of the work you have done, I'm thinking about identifying these opportunities and prioritize them based on this strategy that you have in your institutions, analyzing the value and cost that each of the possible use cases that this team that I mentioned before has already thought of and has already identified. Then you can kind of create a framework for evaluating which pilots are more promising and which pilots should be prioritized. Because this is another failure I see before. People think that by creating dozens of use cases, you are basically doing the right job. But the important thing is not identifying use cases, it's prioritizing the important ones so that they provide institutional value. And this is because it's almost impossible with the current costs that we can actually aim at developing plenty of use cases across the whole institution. The use of AI is very expensive. I think, in fact, it has very high, a lot of hidden costs, like reindexing data and things like that. That when you start really experimenting with them, and when you start experimenting working with different vendors, you realize that the costs are really high. So it's important that you prioritize what's important. And also for that, it's very important that you try to establish alliances and collaborations. Because in many cases, for instance, when we talk about generative AI and large language models, probably for many use cases, I'm sure that many institutions may be sharing the same training cost for the models. For instance, in Spain, yesterday we approved the Spanish AI strategy, and it's based on the idea of building common frameworks and common capabilities like computing, data storage, building LLM models that then all the public administration and universities we can share and trying to create economies of scale. And I think that's going to be very important as well. And finally, once you have identified your use cases, you have prioritized it, you know which ones are really important, when you can try to design and prepare your pilots. And that's why I say I'm not against pilot. I think we should advocate running pilots so that we can know fast if those pilots are really providing the value that we thought they were providing. Because these projects are costly, and also it's important that the pilots may be later sustainable. So it's important that you create this iteration cycle, that you have fast learning from the mistakes, and then you can move from that into scaling those pilots that you have identified as something that, by definition, because you prioritize them, are strategic for the institution, and then you can basically scale them to the whole institution. But for that, it's very important that you consider two aspects. First one is that you do intelligent pilots, in the sense that, running a pilot just for testing a tool basically makes no sense at all. What is important is that you are able to define the pilot so that you can learn from it, even if it's successful or it's not. But at least you can learn, and it's important that you define the KPIs so that you can know whether it's provided and achieved what we expected as a good result or not. And also, it's very important that you run A/B tests so that to know if this is really providing any improvement to what you were expecting before. So this is basically the 10 steps that we thought could guide how we will adopt AI in our institutions. And basically, as a summary, I would say that I'm very positive about the potential of AI in transforming and helping higher education institutions basically achieve and manage to go beyond the great challenges that we have for this decade, in particular the scalability that is required and personalization for our education. And what I'm sure is that definitely AI cannot happen without the leadership of top management at the institutions, and also without having a well-defined strategy. Currently, AI is still a brute force approach. It's very expensive, and in particular, we need to make sure that whatever we do, it's going to provide value to the institution. In that regard, I think that we have to be very aware from the starting that we have to skill our students, technical staff, and of course faculty. And it's important that we experiment in an agile manner. I mean, things are going to change quite a lot in the field of AI in the next few years. So it's not a bad idea experimenting, but we have also to learn how to transform a pilot into a service. And that's very different, because a service, that implies that is supported by the institution, supported by people, and that requires a lot more effort than just trying some AI tool and trying to see what happens. And this is all from my side. Thanks again for the invitation and for your attention.
Yeah, many thanks, Pedro. It strikes me when we talk about digital issues, how often we slide very quickly from a technical discussion to a change management discussion. And I think that's the nature of things. And you demonstrated that very well. Now we have a number of very interesting questions here on our Q&A tab. And the absolute most voted here is a very concrete question that came, I think, during your presentation, Michael. I'll just put it on the screen. Very concrete, what tools and AI systems we use and what features were most used. Is this something that you have an overview over?
Yeah, I can give you a rough, so we've not conducted a thorough survey on this, but through our community work, we know roughly what the pattern is. So where institutions have adopted generative AI tools, it's been Microsoft Copilot. So the version that's the web version, not the 365 version. And where individuals have chosen themselves, it's tended to be ChatGPT. We've also done work with tools specific for education. So in particular, a product called Teachermatic, which has essentially AI generators. It's predefined AI generations for about 60 different tools that educators do. We've tried that in 8 universities and 8 FE colleges, so 16 to 18. It's very, very popular as the approach to generative AI in the further education colleges, with universities perhaps less good at coping with the level of education there. So, but we're definitely seeing some interest in very specific tools focused on education. What do people do? Broadly, it varies things like creating quizzes, lesson plans. New opportunities are things like, say people need to create different scenarios for a piece of work. By hand, it would take ages to just do one. With generative AI, they can create multiple ones. So we're collecting together a whole group of stories that we're going to launch a website with shortly.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, that's interesting. Individuals choose ChatGPT and institutions Copilot, but it's all Microsoft in the end. We have several questions about teaching the teachers, about teaching faculty. How do we do this in terms of AI being? This is one of them. The most voted is a moving target. Pedro, you were very much about engaging the culture, the change management. Do you have a good input on that? How do we do that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I mean, and the fact is that if we think about traditional skilling just by giving courses, we might create great stress in faculty, because this idea of moving targets is something that you might feel that whatever you are learning is useless in 6 months. So that creates a lot of stress. So that's why I advocate more for communities of practice. So this idea of having some people who are already interested in experimenting with these tools and getting them into your team. When I mentioned before this idea of building a team of people which is related or is in charge of deploying AI, and then make them to be your champions in other areas, in particular in other faculties. And in my experience, that worked much better, because they had the feeling that they are all learning together So as technology is changing and as tools are changing, they feel they are all in the same situation, and they're just not having that kind of impression that, look, I'm making an effort that it's useless.
Okay, so there's a follow-up question about competence frameworks. But from what I hear from you is that it's more co-creation than following frameworks.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, for instance, when we were talking about digital competence for educators, we have this DICOM framework, and so the idea of having a framework is fine, but frameworks usually, when they, have validity or long validity, is when they are not tied to specific tools. Then the framework has to be translated into something practical. So I think having frameworks is fine, and still probably the DICOM framework is still valid, but now it's for sure that we have to incorporate this idea of AI into all these different missions and areas that DICOM already defined.
Yeah, you had that as well, Michael. I think in one of your slides that this was a thing that was going on.
Yeah, absolutely. So a multi-pronged approach. So Jisc has a digital capability tool, which is a framework behind it, and a self-assessment, very popular in the UK. We've embedded AI into that tool. So theme here that we try and embed AI into things that exist already wherever possible, rather than doing something separate. Very much also agree about the champions. So that's one of our checklist items, that you've established such a thing when you move along our framework. And we do think there is a place for very short, quick courses, because we find that a lot of people just need to get over the initial hurdle of typing their first prompt in. So we find that very short, just get going courses tend to be quite effective. And they can be done online and, very low effort.
Yeah, just get going course. I like that. Yeah. I like that word. And then we have maybe as a last very, very concrete question, and maybe it's early, maybe you have your favorite example of a university with a good AI strategy, apart from where you come from, of course. Are we at a place where we can say, here's a front runner, here's a favorite?
Right, I'm going to be honest and say not at the moment from our perspective. We've seen in other sectors good examples and again, these are AI embedded in existing strategies. So we're not saying you shouldn't start with an AI strategy. I'll just be clear here that the embedded was at the embedded stage further down the line. At that point, it should be fully within your institutional strategy. And we haven't seen good examples of that so far in the education space. We've seen early signs, but I won't name the institutions, won't be fair.
Okay. Pedro, do you have a favorite?
For me, it's basically the same. I mean, I think most of us, we are just starting, and I haven't found one which is really mature enough. But I mean, for me, that's not a problem, in the sense that, for instance, when 5 years ago we started doing our digital strategy at the University of Murcia, we were already aiming at doing something iteratively and fast evolving, because technology changes very fast. So in this case, I think it has to be the same. Start with a one-page strategy, making sure you have your key ideas and take the right decisions, at least on where are you going to position. I remember these 3 axes I mentioned before. In our case, it took me like several meetings with the whole C-suite at the university until we make sure that we wanted to be user-centric, and that was our main. Because everyone thinks in research we must be leaders, and then of course we want to cut costs and we want to be low cost, and it's important you do something small and then you start building on that. So I think we are right in the good position of developing our AI strategies. I think it's important to look at other sectors, because in some of the sectors things are going fast and you can learn from that. And I'm pretty sure that within a few months, having an AI strategy, which is more or less foundational but practical in many institutions, would be commonplace.
Yeah, foundational but practical, indeed. So we're coming towards the end, and I can see that there are a couple of more questions we won't have time for. Some of them have been partly answered from what you say. Couple of questions also to EUA about what we are doing. Are we looking at this, and having so many members as we have, we're not going to pick out one or two and say this is the direction everybody should go in, because there's so much diversity out there. But what we will do is that we are planning a resource catalog, not only for AI, but for digital transformation as such. We call it the digital transformation map, where you can find small, let's say, some knowledge about different topics within the digital transformation, a lot of good practices, a lot of reports. We are aiming at publishing this in about the next month, so I think that will give a little bit more of a library of examples. It's also a place where of course our members can come and submit examples. So I hope that will bring a little bit more inspiration and a little bit more direction. But we are, of course, and I think we've seen that very much here with these two excellent presentations, and thanks a lot again for having, I think, very complimentary views on the issue. I think we are in a place where we can begin to think more about how do we set up the structures so we can follow what was very rightly called a moving target. So in those words, I want to again thank the speakers and thank all the participants for their very good questions, for listening in. I hope we will see you again on the 18th of June when we're going to talk ethics and other foundational topic for the whole artificial intelligence discussion. And I hope you will want to follow the rest of the activities that we'll have over the next year. So thank you very much. Have a good, for many of us, a good long weekend, and hope to see you soon again.